Thanks so much for the incredible energy and everybody staying here yesterday. I felt like we were all leaning forward, soaking up everything all day long. So it was a really wonderful day. Betsy Rogers, Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, will be our first.
Do you want me to hold this, or how, is the mic on, or do you want to mic me? I don't think I need to. Okay, it's handheld.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Elizabeth or Betsy Barlow Rogers, and I'm the president of the Foundation for Landscape Studies. And I hope that you got in your packets our journal called Sightlines. Everybody, I'm getting a lot of nods. If you didn't, if there are any extra copies, Chris has them. All right, Sightlines is, we say, the byline is a journal of place. And that's what we're going to talk about with our speakers, my session this morning. And so we have Miguel Gandert, and his topic will be space, time, and discovery. The influences of Edward Hall and J.B. Jackson. And just a word about Miguel, he is a professor here, a distinguished professor of communication and journalism, and director of the Interdisciplinary Film and Digital Media Program. And among his publications is Nuevo, México, Profundo, Rituals, Indo-Hispano, Homeland, Hermanitaos, Comanchitos, Indo-Hispano Rituals, Captivity and Redemption. And he also served as photographer for the Plazas in New Mexico. That's your book, isn't it, Chris? Yeah, okay. And then our other speaker is Sabine Delcour, and she is a photographer who received her master's degree in photographic image at the University of Paris. Paris, is it Paris 8? Paris 8. For 20 years, her photography has investigated the unique relationships of body and territory, of speech and sharing of image and reality. Oh, I'm sorry. Speech and sharing, image and reality. For her, taking photos consists in occupying a here, a direct and insistent presence linked to elsewhere, something outside the frame, which makes the frame more complex. Those words allow you to understand exactly why she is here to celebrate the publication of the book on J.B. Jackson. And Miguel is our first.
Everybody hear me okay? Turn mute off. My name is Miguel Gandert, and this is a little different talk than I ever do, and so you've inspired me to look at my work and examine things in a very different way. Over my career in the university, I have a master's degree in art. I'm not trained in the communications field in the academic sense. I've taught in a number of colleges, including grad studies in architecture. I can't build anything. But in many ways, I've had a career that very luckily I've had the best teachers imaginable. Sometimes through their books early on, the books of Edward T. Hall, which I read when I was in my 20s, and really formulating how I was going to be a photographer. And later, I had the honor of working with J.B. Jackson. For me, those are two of the most compelling figures They both created fields that didn't really exist, fields of study. In the case of Hall, he creates the field of intercultural communication, which I'm now allegedly a scholar of. Having taught that for about the last 15 years, including many times having Edward T. Hall, when he was, before his stroke, come and team teach my classes with me. And of course then the time that I spent with J.B. Jackson. And so what I really want to do is, I know they know each other. Helen actually, Horowitz, told me that she went to a birthday party with John Jackson for Ned Hall. And so I always imagined the conversations these two people had, and sort of, in a way, those conversations that I imagine have mediated my work in a really important way. And so I'm going to go back to the beginning before I actually knew either of them. Beaumont Newhall, who I also studied the history of photography with, once told me, take care of your negatives, you never know where they will end up. And this, for me, a picture of Victor Romero I took when I was 20, really has become a foundational image for what becomes my philosophy. At the time, I was primarily working and imagining myself in the capacity of being a photojournalist. I was working for newspapers and the student newspaper at UNM. And I took this picture and I suddenly realized there was something very, very different. And Beaumont's advice was amazing. This picture is now part of America's patrimony, and it is in the collection of the National Museum of American Art. And so you never know what's going to happen to your pictures, and so it's a picture I'm also proud of, but it fundamentally sets me on a path that I think brings me into line with certain conversations I have with Ned Hall's work and also with J.B. Jackson. And partly with Hall, I began to look at photographs in a different way. Having studied at UNM, and one of the things, thank you all for those of you who were at the exhibit last night, Beaumont Newhall made me, when I was an undergraduate student, go through that collection from A to Z. And I looked at every picture and I remember most of them. And so that's why it was really fun to revisit it, creating this exhibit. But one of the things that Beaumont began to get me to try to think about is how your placement in the world exists and what is your viewpoint of how you see. And to begin to do that, I think it may have been Newhall, but I'm not positive, because he was also part of that kind of Santa Fe intellectual circle. So I imagine he may have been in on those conversations as well. And Beaumont had me read the work of Edward T. Hall, the Hidden Dimension and the Silent Language, and my favorite book of his, which is called The Dance of Time. And I began to realize that what I chose and what lenses I chose were really important. I learned from Beaumont that Cartier-Bresson, the great French photographer, was profoundly important to me, used primarily a 50mm normal lens, as did Bernard Ploussel. I learned that Bresson only used wide-angle lenses primarily in closed spaces. When he was in a room or a house, he didn't use that on the street. It was that natural viewpoint. And I knew Bernard not well, but whenever I saw Bernard, it was a single Nikon camera with a 50mm lens that he shot. I would guess at least most of the work that he did in New Mexico. As I read about Hall, I became really interested in proxemics. I became really interested in social distance, cultural distance, space. And in that, I began to choose lenses. I primarily work with only wide-angle lenses. So I believe by reading Hall, I began to incorporate the idea of what I call intimate space. If I always laugh because longer short telephotos are called portrait lenses. And my portrait lens is, I'll put a camera in somebody's face 2 feet away. And that's an intimate portrait versus a likeness, I guess. And when I went to graduate school, prior to graduate school, I worked in shop fairs and carnival people and things. But part of my political activism came out when I was in graduate school because I realized I'd gotten 4 years of undergraduate school at UNM and 3 years of graduate school at UNM, and I had no Latino Hispano faculty at the University of New Mexico. There are still very few of us here. And so I decided I was going to make pictures that look back at my faculty of the people in the community that aren't really a part of the university, and that's where this work comes from. And I just picked every kind of icon. That's me down in the corner, my little marker there. And I photographed people, and I bought lenses that kept getting wider and wider. And now I use only 2 lenses. I use a 21mm lens, which allows me to work very, very close, and a 35mm lens. I have a telephoto lens. It's a short one, and I think there's one book in my book, Nuevo, México, Profundo, that I used it, and that's it. But I decided I would get really intimate, and I would start including lots of space. And so the portraits get wider. The lenses, because they're wide, have an ample amount of depth. And it's really based on me thinking about how close and how important cultural space is. And so I'm reading this and saying, well, I can institute that into my image making. And so I'm really interested in background, foreground relationships. And all of these things are starting to happen, and this becomes my master's thesis and my graduate work. And at the time, I did not know that there was a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Santa Fe named Steve Yates. This is a lowrider bicycle picture. This is one of my favorite, Dimples and Stoner. And Steve Yates was watching my work evolve. And I had known about the New Mexico Photographic Survey, which becomes the Essential Landscape, which is uses Jackson's essays in the book. And I knew about it because my teacher, Thomas Barrow, was in it, who was my mentor and really my advisor for my thesis. And I knew it because Ann Noggle, who was in the book, was a really good friend and also had been a professor at UNM. And unbeknownst, on the night that I graduated, Steve Yates came to the graduation and said, I have held back money from this NEA grant, and you have 2 months to finish a body of work that we will put in the Essential Landscape. And a week later, I met with him. He handed me a number of Jackson's writings, much to my embarrassment. I was not that familiar with Jackson at the time. And I read them, and I was profoundly moved. One of the pictures that had two of the essays, which seem so exciting to me now, were headed by my photographs. One of them was social landscape, and the other one was theater, the landscape of theater. And those were the 2 essays that they used. My photographs, this was used as the intro, or the heading picture for the landscape of theater. And this was a picture that John became very, he liked this picture a lot, I guess, I don't know. This is the picture that he told Steve Yates that, although I met him at the opening, you really don't talk to people at openings, that Steve Yates called me up and said, John Jackson would like you to make some pictures for him. And I thought, wow, that's like the coolest thing I've ever heard. And partly, the landscape of theater was so perfect because when I wrote the written portion of my thesis, I quoted Kurt Vonnegut and the saying from his book, Mother Night, you are what you pretend to be, so you must be careful what you pretend to be. And I sort of wrote about the abstract idea that I was photographing people pretending to be who they are. And so there was sort of an almost instant connection. This is Bader's first plaza. When I got the grant, I had to define what it would be, so I took a protractor and I drew a big circle starting in the center of this mountain, and that would be my part of New Mexico for the New Mexico Photographic Survey, and it very much included a lot of my work. This was also in the essential landscape. One of the things that's really hard, memory is a very difficult thing. And I often really feel pain that I didn't remember the conversations and the editing sessions that John and I had. I would come over with a box of slides. We'd lay them out. I'd bring a light table because he usually edited with a projector. He had a projector that you could put a whole load of slides in. And I'd bring a little light table over and we'd lay out, you know, half a roll at a time. And he would pick the ones that he liked out. And I never paid much attention to it. And I wish I had paid more attention because I'm sure it would have been a great lesson. But one of the things that's always interested me and always bothered me, and I don't know if Paul or Chris or the people who are familiar with his slides have seen a version of this, but to my memory, this is one of the pictures Jackson never picked. And I would shoot color and black and white at the same time, and I'm showing you, this is sort of another one of those key figures in my career. It's David and Cheryl, and I call it 51 Chevy. But this is the version that Jackson could have taken for his collection. And I've always wondered why he didn't, but somehow I think it was partly, it was too direct, and he was more into seeing the information that was in my photographs. And I don't know, Chris, have you ever seen the color version of it? But this was all shot. You could see the importance of the roadside in the car. This was at Tingley Beach. But it's one of the ones that Jackson, and so now I think about this quite much. Why didn't John pick this one? Why would not he have wanted this picture? And I think he was really about, on a certain level, the other information that you found in an image. Even though for me, I love this picture, the cassette tapes on a print you can read that says Friday Night Forever. You know, I mean, things like that make me crazy. But as I continued to work after working with John, he was very kind to me. He knew I did not like American beer. And somehow he knew when I was coming, or we had talked before we came. Sometimes I would meet him in Albuquerque. We would eat at First Cafeteria after he would go to the Baptist church with the Black Baptists. A very curious man. But he always knew I was coming, and he always had 2 bottles of Dos Equis in the refrigerator so that I would not have to drink his American beer. But I began seeing more and really working in space and place. And the conversations with Jackson were very one-sided. And they're not one-sided in the way you would think a conversation with John Jackson would be. John Jackson with me was always asking questions. And he may have been the most amazing listener that I ever worked with, drove with, spent time in cars with, that I've ever met. He wanted to know about everything. When we looked at the pictures, he wanted to know about the stories of these pictures. Who were these people? This is a picture I call Los Chileros. Definitely influenced by Jackson, because when I was working with him, he was really into the idea of the roadside and how people commodified it and made it theirs. It was very much most of the pictures of mine that you've seen in the different slide lectures that people have been so kind to show my work with Jackson. You know, there are people with Chile, there are flea markets, there's wood people. These were the things that at the brief period of time that I was able to work with John, that he really wanted. But he taught me things also to look at things in a very different way. This is from an NEH grant that I did on Centennial Farms in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico. This is Horacio. And this is his house. And you see, he has every single car and vehicle he's ever owned is parked somewhere on his property. And that school bus that's in the back of this picture is a storage shed. But my favorite is the first car that he ever owned is back there, this Model A. And it's beautiful. But one of the things I learned is the Model A was so important to him because the parts were interchangeable with a John Deere tractor that he had. And all of this made, you know, when Jackson and I would talk about trailers, we would talk about space. It was about how people utilized in the utilitarian way that they worked with things. And so all of my work at this point, especially on these particular projects, is very much informed by Jackson. This is a farm in San Luis Valley. I'm laying in the grass and I have hay fever and snot is running down me and I suffer for my art. In other images, I began to explore different cameras, different formats. This is Taos Pueblo, was used on the poster that we did when Chester was teaching here at UNM. And I started using a panoramic, but I always became much more aware after being with Jackson about the beauty in the place. I did a lot of work in Mexico. This is a Maquila family, a family that had come from the interior of Mexico to work in Nogales, and that cardboard box is their house. And so I began to try to see different ways. The street corners became wonderfully more dynamic with me. And in the 21mm lens, I began to place myself in the middle of it, not just for the closeness that I learned about being from Hall, but also because with a wide-angle lens in close, you were able to incorporate more stuff in the backs of the pictures to make them be more relevant. I had this idea that I wanted to try to make pictures and put as much stuff in them until they explode. But I'm always working very, very close, and the streets became much more important to me, I think, because of what I learned from Jackson, and the people became much more compelling. I began to shift away from the portrait, but the portrait is always coming back. Then I did my book, Nuevo, México, Profundo, where I began to get in the middle of the thing. And Chris partnered on this, wrote a really eloquent essay, kind of biographical piece. Lucy Lepard, who's with us, wrote a very kind essay. Lucy and I talked for many years. We met through my work, and later we interviewed Lucy as part of the film with Janet Mendelsohn, the special features on J.B. Jackson. And, but I began working and really loving the intimacy of the camera, the presence of physical space, and learning, at least with the Latino community. These are not indigenous people. These are, or in what we call Native Americans. They're indigenous people. They're the mix of Hispanic and Native American, or Spanish colonial and Native people. And there I'm much more comfortable and working much more intimately, and I'm still trying to keep the concern for space. I'm still starting to use more and more the panoramic frame. All of my pictures are full frame. What does that mean? I shoot still on film, and I never crop the negatives. So what I shoot is what you get. And, but I also realized from working with Hall, there are a few Native American pictures in this book. There's some in the Plaza book. And you notice that the space becomes very different when I'm photographing Native American communities. I learned from Hall that there's a different physicality that you don't get in the middle of the dance the way that I would in a Hispano community. You become sensitive to those spatial relationships. I use my less wide lenses to try to incorporate as much as I can in the frame, knowing the realization there are cultural differences. And so these are some of those. But then I also, think back a lot to how when I drove with John, and even though the pictures weren't as kind of visual anthropology and complex as this, that they were very different because for me, he wasn't just about what was in the pictures. He always wanted to know as much about, especially the images of people. On the little poster, there's a picture of a lowrider mechanic whose shop is the back of his car. And he wanted to know things like, how do they get an engine out? And I said, well, they tie a chain around the branch of a tree. It's at somebody's house, or they find a house that they can do that. And they'll pull the engine out. He just thought that was fascinating. And so he always wanted stories. And so it was more and more as I began to utilize pictures, I became more and more interested in how the stories and the narratives began to happen. And now the stories are absolutely the most important part of these narratives. This is Abiquiu, New Mexico, what we call a Genízaro community. Genízaro being Hispanicized or tribalized Indian, detribalized Indians. And this was from my book, Profundo. And I love the way in these rituals, both the dark side and the ritualistic side are pertained. This is just called the drunk dance. It's about how the Indians were pacified with liquor. The landscape becomes more important in Profundo, a sense of place and the sanctity of place, the sacred places. What I learned about John, and it sort of goes back to that environmental question, he was really concerned, it seemed to me, at this period of his life, about who decides what happens to space. He really argued that trailers were beautiful. I mean, it was passionate that trailers in a house, because he told me once, trailers are why poor people are allowed to stay at their places. He was really interested in that idea, that these things could be beautiful as homes. And so, you know, it gave me a sense of these different communities that I worked with and how strong this work could be. And I just love ritual, and now I'm photographing all over the world. I'm photographing in Spain, a lot of work in Bolivia. I'm working in a book on Bolivia. And I've been doing Moors and Christian celebrations throughout the Americas. So this is kind of the direction it goes, but it's always about the intimacy, working with the wide angles, not telephoto lenses that I got from Hall, and then trying to figure out the stories and give sense of place that I so much owe to Jackson. And so these are some of those. And this was the communities that he really loved. These were his neighbors. These were the people that he really became an important part of that community in La Cienega. A lot of these pictures were made after John died, but I would have really loved to have shared them with him. The other part of my great education, and then we'll just kind of be moving towards the end here, was the work that I did with one of the other people I know who really knew Jackson well and probably knew him way more than I did, which is Chris Wilson. And I think Jackson was infused in our conversations. I did a book called The Plazas of New Mexico with him, and I think Jackson's imprint is very much on the work. When Chris first asked me, he said I told him I couldn't do the book, I'm not an architectural photographer. Whereupon, like all great educators, he sat down, picked out a couple of pictures from Profundo, and he showed the way that I was dealing with space and place, and that he wanted pictures that put people back into the places. And so we made that book, and I'm very proud of it. This is Mesilla, San Juan Pueblo. This is my favorite picture, wasn't in the book, from San Juan Pueblo, but it's a picture I really like, because a few days earlier I had been at Sandia Pueblo, where they don't allow pictures, and I walked around an adobe house in Sandia Pueblo, and I saw a little boy in a snow cone machine. And the dances on the plaza were amazing. They're dramatic, they're beautiful. And I see a picture very much like this, and that's the picture I want to make. It's sort of a Jackson picture of the vernacular and place and space. And 3 days later, 4 days later, I'm at San Juan Pueblo, and I walk around a corner, and this picture becomes my gift. But I was shooting pictures for the plaza. Santa Fe, a picture that Chris considers really a landmark image of mine. Finally, absolutely breaking down physical space. These are kids they call the plaza rats in Santa Fe. You imagine this kind of 50-ish old man sitting there with the camera laying down with all these kids, and they're still totally comfortable with it. I think those are lessons I learned from Hall, and yet those people, Jackson would have had 100 questions and different stories about them. These are a few more pictures from the Plaza book. But once again, you know, using the panoramic camera, because this project was much more about space. Las Vegas, New Mexico, for Betsy, who's done a book on Las Vegas. I did my book on my stuff for the Plaza book. And all of these become moments that are so important to me. and then the last, I think Chris really figured out me when he just really convinced me to do the book when he just said road trip. Which is, imagining Jackson, talked to Anton Credock, who is the architect who built this building, and he rode motorcycles with Jackson. And I think road trip's the way. This is some pictures from a final project I did with a Texas Tech University called Llano Estacado, Islands in the Sky. And I photographed the human marks on the beginning of the Great Plains, which started in New Mexico. Trailers. And then to sort of end this, of course, the car. And to take a phrase that sort of synthesizes both the emotions and things that Ned Hall and J.B. Jackson gave me, I go back to the important French photographer Cartier-Bresson, who said something that to me is one of the most profound statements ever, which is, life is once, forever. Thank you very much. Take a little technical moment so we get Sabine plugged in.
You had just heard a wonderful talk by Miguel on what I would say how to perceive place. And now Sabine is going to say something about how to belong to a place.
First, I'd like to thank Monica, Frédéric Poussin, and Chris Wilson in the University of New Mexico for having invited me to this seminar. I'm going to present part of my photographic work over a period of 20 years that illustrate the relation between photography and landscape, and briefly explain the implementation of my explorations. The images that I'm going to show you were realized with a 4x5 large format camera as part of residencies, artist in residence programs, invitations, or commissions. The observation and the relationships that we maintain with landscape are the starting points of each of my photographic series of urban sites, natural or wild areas. Each of my investigations focuses on the way we inhabit the world. I have been studying urban territories and landscapes shaped by man. Little by little, I stepped away from inhabited zones. I followed winding tracks and untold pathways far from the hustle and bustle of cities to reach the sea. Each series leads me to the next one, like a never-ending story. I'm presently interested in sites that tell the story of the Earth and to give birth to a series entitled Bas-relief, carried out between 2010 and 2012 in 3 phases in France and abroad. Itza-sur-Rac is the first part of this trilogy. I was invited in creative residency for 5 months on the Domaine d'Abadia in the south of France, close to the Spanish border. Just to give you an idea of the context, I was living on a cliff along the Basque coast, 50 meters from the ocean. I was snatched by the area and its environment, an unstable mineral world leading to the rhythm of the tide and the oceanic influence undergoing the erosion of the coast. Attracted by this aquatic geography, I observed, surveyed these landscapes. What interested me was invisible, inaccessible. How could I transcribe and free myself from this first original image? This matrix represented by the sea, or at least its immersive landscapes. I waited until the sea drew back and I discovered L'Estran, this portion of the territory which gets uncovered according to the tides. A space-time when water and land separ and reveal to us an open sky book on nature's archives. Geologists advised me to visit different sites in Spain where you can see probably the most spectacular fish outcrops in the world. I didn't master the codes nor the specific geological knowledge to decipher the story engraved in the rock. I found myself like a blind man passing a landscape. His apprehension is not listen, he just uses another sense than sight. What I mean through this example is that whatever the reason why we are in a place or face to a place, as an actor or a spectator, whose perception is nonetheless multisensorial and differs from one person to another. Thus, is it fragmentary and subjective? The landscape is not single but manifold. I'm sorry, I have to read because I'm totally afraid to read English.
You're doing a job.
Do you understand me?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just hard when you speak French and have to read it.
So, second part. So I looked for other archaic and original sites to expand this series. My research led me in the High Hall. Then, I was invited in residency by the Galerie the Pastoral Theatre in Gap from 2010 to 2011. Gap is located in an extremely mountainous environment which offers some of the highest French tops. The ocean may have drawback from there 65 million years ago. The second part of the present work is entitled A Matter of Taste, and it definitely was one. I was generally walking at an altitude of 6,500 feet, and I was carrying my 4x5 camera, chassis, tripod, and mountain equipment. It was a physical trial. I was more than ever hand-to-hand with my subject. Working with a large format camera differs from instantaneous photography. It requires time and precision. My pictures are the result of a mental construction confronted with reality, and the way I use my camera is part of this experiment. I modify space and give it another dimension. This is a crossing of the image while give body to space. By manipulating what I'm photographing through my use of optical tilt and shift, I blur the notion of scale and time. This optical illusion distorts a vision which I use to only one plane of sharpness and not to several ones. My work consists in sculpting space, just like the artists of the first bas-relief did when they simulated false perspective in the rock in order to compensate the low relief which this type of sculpture implied. So the first part. I continued this exploration in Iceland with a research fellowship from the French Institute for 2 months. The geological nature of the island, its geographical location at the edge of the Arctic Circle on the mid-Atlantic ridge, its insular isolation made it an inescapable terrain for exploration. Iceland is the least populated country in Europe, with only 3 inhabitants per square kilometer. It has a large number of accessible glaciers and offers a great diversity of landscape, all in broad daylight, 24 hours a day, almost ideal conditions. I felt it was important to arrive by sea, so I drove from Paris. My methodology joined the shape. My work requires my getting immersive. It doesn't mean just going towards, watching or photographing, but also projecting myself as much physically as mentally. I need to think of a site, to desire it, then go and search it, to track it down on foot, to lose myself in it. This concentric approach phase contributes to the imaginary that I developed during these field experiences, which I need to construct on Earth. And now I'm going to show you a series entitled Cheminement, following Pass, shoot between 2005 and 2009 in residency or on commissions. I choose this example because from then on, my work process has changed. On the one hand, I use only the photographic medium. We will see that in the previous series I use text and sound, and on the other hand, I work on a territory which is not bounded by physical limits as it was in the builders of transport, which I will project later. Cheminement is a group of ways and paths worn out through nature, away from cities in different regions of France. I eliminated from the image any human presence. The human being absent from the frame is only perceptible by the track he leaves and his imprint on the landscape. This proposition doesn't concern a physical geography nor a precise itinerary, but a kind of personal topography and an intimate voyage. I indulged wandering at the cross paths, questioned the borders and the passages from the visible world to the sensitive world. During this research, I interviewed the people who walk and survey these territories, and they confided the stories of their life. They have fed my imagination, and they have been the link between myself and the landscape I was collecting. The builder resulted from a commission of the Contemporary Art Center of the town of Saint-Clair in Normandy in 2000. The project was to question their own town within the collective exhibition Let's Imagine a Place, dedicated to the imaginary nature of spaces and their development. During the 60s, Hérouville, which was a village with 1,000 inhabitants, was chosen to welcome on its territory the building of a new town. The employment pool, which was expanding, attracted workers from all over France. It was urgent to build social and collective accommodations. The population multiplied by 30 in 20 years' time, it became the second city in the department at the end of the 20th century. When the first inhabitants settled in, the city wasn't completed. They had to live on a building site. This situation gave birth to daily difficulties to shop, to move around, etc. Public transport was not yet organized. There was no supermarket, just the old village grocery store to feed all these new mouths. Solution had to be found. The inhabitants helped on another, joined and created a strong social network which took part in the development of the city. From then on, 30 years later, I wanted to mention the birth of this town. I recorded the testimonies of the first inhabitants who tell us the story of the town. They get older in, describe it, analyze it. I wrote them down word for word, as well as their vision of things. I edited extracts of these anonymous interviews in a text which accompanies pictures showing places belonging to all. The water tower, the buildings of the economic zone, the coaling tower of the old foundry, the hospital center, the shopping center. Each of these images presented an architecture or a site which is a landmark for everyone living in Hérouville. I set my camera on the ground from where the city had emerged. Here is an extract from this text, and you can, if you wish, download it on my website. This text has also been recorded by professional readers. This latest series is in fact my first work on the landscape. Just one. In 1992, at the end of my university studies, I participated in a photographic mission of the General Council of the Tanzania concerning transportation in the northeastern suburbs of Paris. I mapped out my itinerary with the help of old guidebooks from the 19th century until the 1970s. By reading them, I chose some places in the suburbs and I went to photograph them with an old folding travel camera. Each picture is inlaid with the description of the site depicted, taken from one of the guidebooks. The text written yesterday and the images of today fit into each other and initiate a double tension, which makes the effect of time on the way of life and on places visible. It was like traveling in time on a territory which doesn't entice you to tourism. Tanzania used to be in the 19th century an industrial area and has become in the 90s an underprivileged suburb which doesn't attract tourists. So on the right of each picture, you will find a caption which indicates the geographical location, and underneath the reference of the guidebook is it extracted from. So we can read some part. You can read by yourself, but maybe we can read for you.
Yes. Before leaving Homeland, can you hear me? The powder, known as common powder, is not the only one obtained. Powders known as foreign powders and top quality powder, which is much sought after abroad, are made only in tiny quantities. Finally, there's a coarser sort of it, old people's home powder, sold only to hospitals and homes. It is very low priced. The soil of Homeland is of a red, sandy, very clayish. It was once covered with sand, and it contains marine shells of a wide enough range of species, the couple of which may have disappeared sometimes and let the casing or the cast show. Couple is actually a clay pot that is used to filter metals to separate gold, for instance, from lead. Okay, so te or test in French.
Just to give you, so I use my translator. Donc dans cette image, ce bâtiment que l'on voit est un restaurant, est une chaîne de restaurants qui ne vend que du bœuf.
So the building that you see in the picture is a restaurant that only serves beef. Ponta still functions somewhat as a rustic suburb. Livestock trade has been preserved from any impulse towards modernization. Open the phone book and you'll see that there are many sheep and beef farmers.
The last one.
Who in Paris knew the name of Bobigny only 20 years ago? Not even the postal workers in the big Parisian post offices.
Aujourd'hui, Bobigny fait partie des très grandes villes de la Seine-Saint-Denis. Bien sûr, beaucoup plus d'habitants.
So today, Bobigny is now part of the much bigger city of Saint-Denis, which a much larger population.
So, as a conclusion, there are many and infinite interpretations of the landscape, for it expresses the relationship between man and his environment. It belongs to us and we are alike. What we make of it is what we make with our lives. I use photography in a sort of distant closeness with reality. the image possesses this unique ability to expand beyond what it shows. The technical nature of its recording process, as it implies an optical production, is nonetheless a retranscription of a virtual and unpredictable image. Finally, creation is not linked to any sort of need. It remains an intuitive and visceral act. With the lapse of time, my approach has become more global, more transversal, and subjective. It's my way of being present and alive in the world I belong to. And thank you for listening to me.
Okay, speakers, I invite you to sit down. That's all, okay. Does everybody have a message?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I mentioned that the organization of which I'm president is called the Foundation for Landscape Studies, and the mission statement is to promote an active understanding of the meaning of place in human life. So I'd like to start off with asking the two of you to react to that mission statement and to say what you think this is active understanding of the meaning of place in human life. You're doing it with your cameras, but now you can do it with your words.
Oui,
Miguel.
Madame est chef d'une fondation dont la mission principale est de comprendre le sens d'un lieu. Donc, comment est-ce que votre travail rentre dans cette mission? Confier un sens actif à un lieu.
I've stunned them into silence.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to mention this. Later, we will have questions, but we must keep them short. Okay.
For me, you know, the beauty of photography is it's a transitory notion. I have yet to completely embrace, or very little embrace, the digital era, because there's something about a negative as artifacts in time, and something that's present to its moment. So a negative is just like a bullet in a Civil War through the cemetery or something. And for me, photography is about place. It's about time. Sometimes it's about saving place. I did a book called Hotel Mariachi that I didn't, of course, show you. But, you know, we saved a hotel in Mariachi in LA that was going to be torn down and commodified. And so for me, photography is a weapon to understand and a weapon to hold and grasp, you know, important things in the world, and artists get to express those things they feel passionate about. I mean, the great thing about being a photographer, and when I think of Sabine's work, is she was there at those places, and that is so huge. I mean, you can't make a picture from here. You know, I've got to be there and the same to see those marvelous places, and that's what that means to me. It's the preservation of place and being able to then see it for someone else and share it.
And you want to speak about belonging to
Let's,
place.
a little summary.
Oh, I'm so sorry, yes.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry, Miguel, I missed a small part because I was also, okay? So Miguel says that Bon, pardon.
I thought she was being polite, so that I would
Donc, pour Miguel, il s'agit surtout de garder une certaine beauté transitoire d'un paysage. Et c'est pour cela qu'il n'a pas trop cette ère numérique, que l'appareil numérique n'est vraiment pas un moyen qu'il préfère, que c'est vraiment l'appareil traditionnel qui lui permet de saisir une certaine essence d'un lieu. Et on emploie le terme arme, that it's a weapon, que c'est une arme pour appréhender le mot. Et ce qu'il a beaucoup apprécié dans la photographie de Sabine, c'est justement le fait qu'elle était là. Voilà ce que ces images nous disent. Elle était là et que finalement c'est ça la photographie pour lui, c'est une manière de préserver un lieu. Okay.
So, and the last question was?
Oh, I was saying that we're talking about an active understanding of the meaning of place in human life. And your title is How to Belong to a Place.
Yeah.
And we've seen you appropriating place in your photographs. But let's hear you now speak about how you do that other than in your photographs.
Yeah.
How you choose place and are in place.
Yeah. This is quite difficult to answer clearly because I'm not clear anymore. You can see. I blur many things, also the conception of Homeland. Je vais parler en français, je sais plus clair. Oui, j'ai vraiment un besoin de temps et d'observation qui est un processus de travail qui participe à la manière à ma relation au lieu ou au territoire ou aux espaces dans lesquels je vais travailler. Je peux m'arrêter de temps en temps et tu traduis.
Okay. Si tu veux bien répéter,
Je répète.
parce que c'était assez complexe comme idée.
Donc j'ai dit, pour pouvoir travailler, j'ai besoin de temps pour pouvoir observer et donc le processus de travail est très important en fait dans mon rapport à l'espace.
That time is very important in the way in which she relates to space. It is important to the way in which she works, to the process, and it is time that defines her relationship to space.
And yeah, finally, I think time is my real subject, in fact. It's not really the landscape. The landscape is a pretext.
It's just a pretext.
Yeah, to be somewhere, to be here. But it's for that also I use this aberration of optical tilt and shift, or yeah, almost this one. It's a connection with the Michel.
With the scale.
With the scale of time, in fact. And this is poetic, this is totally not scientific, but just to, je me pose en fait sur une échelle de temps dans ce paysage archaïque, en tout cas, pour ces séries.
That she places herself on a scale of time for an archaic landscape, such as oceans.
Well, I think sometimes the best part of a conversation like this is to have questions from you to the speakers. So if you would like to begin, someone will bring a mic so we can hear and then we will have short questions, which will help the translator, but also help us to have more discourse during the remaining time that we have.
This applies to both of you, but I think especially Miguel, because you do not have as many people in your photographs. There's nothing wrong with that. It was an incredible pairing. You can translate the little piece and then the second part if you like. Or should I can do it all at once. Miguel, everyone knows this in the room probably, but I don't. Still, and probably it's been written a million times by all photographers who can become invisible somehow, or not invisible. How do you get so close?
What do you do?
Do you want to translate? Just probably the last sentence.
Donc, d'abord, monsieur a dit que c'était vraiment un très bon mariage de vous mettre ensemble dans la mesure où on ne trouve vraiment pas de gens dans vos photographies. Et la question que pose monsieur Miguel, c'est que how do you get so close? Did I? Yes. Okay.
Invisible.
Okay. Okay. Comment est-ce que vous devenez invisible? Comment est-ce que vous vous rapprochez d'un paysage?
You know, it's a funny thing. I can't be invisible. I'm not like I'm sort of a fat guy, you know. I'm sort of a big person, and I have a tiny camera. And
the camera's hidden. It's just.
when my students ask me this question a lot, so it's a very hard question to answer. But what I tell people is you have to know why you want to make a picture. You have to know why you feel that you can intrude into people's physical space. And for me, it's always, I have to have that answer before I go out to work. If I know why I want to photograph it, whether I'm asking someone to make a portrait on the street, or I'm just, why me, and why you instead of someone else, it makes a huge difference. And the other thing is you can't have fear. If you're nervous or you're afraid or you're uptight, people sense that and they sense that something's wrong. And for me, it's like a gesture of love. It's the awe of wanting to be close and inside with people. And people seem to kind of forgive my intrusion. I mean, I've had conversations with anthropologists who are appalled at the way I look. And they think they're invisible with this like giant lens sitting in the back of the room. And I'm like going, you're trying to sneak something. I'm just in the middle of the conversation. I think Lucy actually, when she wrote about my work, really hit it. I just like to dance. It's all the dance. It's just being in the dance with whatever situation you're shooting and trying to be comfortable. So I hope that's a good answer.
Donc, en réponse à la question, comment vous rendez-vous invisible? Miguel répond, je ne peux pas. D'abord, je suis trop gros. Et que j'ai un tout petit appareil photo, mais je suis grand. Donc, la question la plus importante qu'il se pose, c'est que tout photographe devrait se poser, c'est pourquoi vous voulez prendre une photo? Pourquoi voulez-vous faire cette espèce d'intrusion? D'accord? Et il faut connaître la réponse. On a besoin de la réponse. Lui, il a besoin de la réponse avant qu'il commence le travail. Et il ne faut pas avoir peur. Et parce que les gens s'en rendent compte et que pour lui, c'est un geste d'amour, c'est une manière de se rapprocher des gens et de faire pardonner son intrusion aux gens. Et c'est une manière de rentrer dans une danse collective. Okay? Yes.
Oh, yeah, Chris Wilson from here in the School of Architecture, and I've worked with Miguel in the field, so if I may make a comment. Miguel is, I will say he's a kachina, he's a dancer. And it's very clear what kind of dancer he is because he has a film bag on the side and he has 3 cameras here. And so people, know who he is. And the way that he moves in those situations is very non-threatening. He makes sure that people sees him. He has a way of moving into people's peripheral vision and pausing there and people can see. And somehow he enlists people in what he's doing. And they understand and they cooperate. They cooperate with him. And as he said, his wide-angle lenses allows him to get into intimate space. And I think that he is part of the social situational frame. He happens to have a camera, but he's another person in that situational frame. Yeah, one of the players.
Yes, then I see. Okay. Do you want me to translate? Just in a quick paraphrase, because I sense that there are a lot of questions, that it is a matter of que c'est une question de rentrer dans une situation sociale, que Miguel a de quoi entretenir cette relation, il n'est pas trop intrusif, et que c'est justement le fait qu'il emploie, je ne sais pas comment on dit wide-angle lens.
Un lente gran ángulo. In Spanish. Más o menos lo mismo. I don't speak French.
Okay. C'est un objectif de... C'est ça? Ok, merci. Un objectif de comprendre qui lui permet justement d'entretenir cette relation non intrusive avec ces sujets. Alors, Lynn et monsieur, et ensuite vous.
I have a question for Sabine, but I will do it in French to communicate, and I ask you to translate. Because
In English, okay. You have to tell me.
yeah, because there's an expression I don't know how to say it in English, very essential one. The question is, vous avez évoqué une question fondamentale, de toutes sortes de photographies, mais surtout dans le contexte de landscape, de paysage, photographie de paysage, c'est très important. C'est la question du temps. Mais la question essentielle, sur toute photographie, mais quand on travaille, on n'est pas en phase. Voilà la question. L'expression, quand on n'est pas en phase avec la situation, avec le paysage, comment on fait? Ou bien, au contraire, comment on peut savoir qu'on est en phase avec la situation? Comment on élimine, comment on résout le problème?
En se décalant.
Voilà, donc la réponse de savoir comment on travaille avec le temps.
Avec le temps et en se décalant.
Pour développer la situation.
Oui, oui.
Donc, monsieur, vous vouliez dire en face ou en phase? En phase. Okay. Donc vous avez compris la question en français. Okay. So in English, when Lynn asked the question, when one is in front of a landscape, one is not in sync with the landscape, right? Okay. In sync.
In a good relationship, with the kind relationship, it's very difficult to say that in English, I think.
Yeah. One is not in a synchronized relationship, in a relationship of simultaneity with the landscape or with the situation, right? And so the question is, how do you render that? And Sabine's response is by, en se décalant, by distancing yourself from it, by separating yourself from it.
No, it's not exactly that.
No?
She's talking about, she's not saying that, she's saying time.
Time, so,
And,
But basically, it's like, you know, it's like, it's exactly the problematic of the photography. You have just a fragment, and in fact, in my case, I don't show, I'm not only interested by what I have inside my frame, I'm more interested by all around that. So when I said it's a kind of décalage.
a temporal shift, through a temporal shift. Sabine says, I don't know how to translate civically. For me, it's a question of, I'm going by what Einstein teaches us, that space is time. They're both the same thing. So when you sort of separate yourself, I see it as a spatial distanciation. But okay.
it's an inclusive, poetic, or sphere she's in, that she comes to in time. And she just is talking about that relation. There's no separation. Neither is the other camera.
Oh, I think Lori has a comment or.
Well, I just want to say something very quickly. Sabine a dit que ce qui l'intéressait n'était pas ce qui se trouvait dans le cadre exactement, mais aussi ce qui se trouvait à l'extérieur.
This is a very brief question, I hope. One of my mentors told me that designers should never work on a spot where they have not slept overnight on the site. So my question for you is that I see this wonderful work, beautiful work. I love it. But when do you sleep out there? Do you go out to I see you in the mountains, and I think, well, you either went there once and then you left, or you went there and you actually were there for a time. Do you actually spend time out in the sites overnight?
Est-ce que
Au départ, c'était
okay,
if I sleep in the mountains, sure. Not all the time.
But I mean, not in the water, but.
Not in Iceland, for example, when I was sleeping.
Did you wake up there?
Yeah, because this is really it's like
Good answer, I got it.
if you see your lover only sometimes, it's not really a lover, so you have to be with him all the
Je voulais remercier les deux auteurs pour la qualité des images qu'ils nous ont montrées. Ça restera en mémoire. Et poser une question à Sabine. En quoi les images de Miguel font sens pour toi?
So first, Monique would like to thank both of our participants for the quality of their interventions. They will stay for a long time with her. And the question for Sabine is, how do these pictures, how do Miguel's pictures make sense for you? Or I guess another way you could ask is, how do you make sense of the pictures of Miguel?
Yeah, sure, when you see in fact, I think we are interested almost by the same things. Me, I'm really interested by the people are the carrot.
They're the carrot.
But just we have another way to be with them or to be, probably that was interesting to be in the same place together and to shoot together. Yeah, and by chance we have a lot of way to see the world and to talk about that.
Okay.
Can I respond to
You don't want to come
I keep going back to Cartier-Bresson because he's very important to me, the photographer. And there were two great photo teachers who used the same book to teach photography, and they were absolutely opposite in their vision. And they weren't photographic books, but they were Eric Hagel's Zen and the Art of Archery. And it was both Cartier-Bresson, which he considered that to be the most important book about learning photography, which was a meditation on space and time. And the other was Minor White, who very much shoots space in a very different way. And so you have one, an absolute street photographer, action photographer, but meditating on the moment and trying to be that Zen archer whirling something to happen. And then you have Minor White in the same way. These are just two very different forms of a meditation. I mean, she is sitting there with the camera, present in the moment, manipulating the articular kind of world there in front of it, but it's still about that moment. And so I think they're just two different forms of a kind of meditation. And I think that's the commonality. The beauty is the moment. The beauty is what lies not within the frame, but outside the frame, and how you decide what part of that do you bring back and share.
Donc, le point commun entre les deux formes d'art, les deux manières de travailler, c'est que, selon Miguel, ça fait partie d'une méditation commune. Okay? Ça fait partie d'une méditation commune.
Well, I'll try and speak up. It is wonderful to see two such accomplished photographers using film, especially when they're younger than you are, and very reassuring that way. So my question to both of you is, what can you do with film that you can't do with a digital camera?
Yeah, first me, I use a 4x5 glass format camera. Is quite very big, so I'm also in the dark. Do I use the carpet?
Cloth.
What?
Cloth.
Cloth. So and it's heavy, and I need that to be physically in the space where I shoot. And I use also digital graphic. I cannot escape. But for the moment, I don't find the same process, or a process where I can be full. I don't know.
Donc, pour les francophones, comme dans la mesure où Sabine travaille avec une caméra, avec une chambre noire 4-5, elle a vraiment besoin...
Je peux le dire si...
Ok. Oui. Oui.
Donc, oui.
Elle a besoin de s'adapter physiquement dans l'espace.
Non, c'est vrai que travailler avec cet outil est très important dans le processus et dans le fait d'être physiquement ancré. J'ai toujours trouvé, des artifices pour vraiment donner de la place au territoire, comme par exemple, je posais la chambre sur le sol. Vous avez pu remarquer dans certaines images, le sol entre dans l'image.
That she has learned how to use certain techniques, certain artifices, in order to give place to territory. As you may have seen in some of her pictures, the ground enters into her frames, into her pictures and her images.
Ouais. Et la différence donc avec, donc bien sûr l'outil numérique est extraordinaire et apporte énormément de choses, mais Pour l'instant, je n'utilise que quand on m'oblige, par exemple, à
Okay.
l'utiliser.
She only uses digital cameras when she's forced to do so, when she's asked to do so. Miguel.
Yeah, for me, I'm sort of a silly romantic. It's about magic. It's about silver. It's about light. It's about a camera lucida where painters were looking through and seeing things. It's about the awe of finding a negative. You know, when I shoot digitally, and I do shoot digitally, I can look at it right away. And the magic is gone when you process a roll of film and you get to hold it up the first time. It's magic. And it's sort of this silly romantic notion, but it also makes me shoot in a different, more disciplined way. Whatever format, if I have to stop every 36 frames, you know, I have a 32 gig card in my digital camera, and that's like the equivalent of you know, 80 rolls of film, and then I can just reuse it. I can reformat it, and it doesn't have that kind of, I don't know, discipline and intellectual and poetic space, you know. It's like 4x5. I was actually telling Frank Golke, who's here, is one of my photographers. I was telling him, you know, when I retire, I'm like looking to buy this $2,000 wooden camera that looks just like a camera from 1880, and it's because I want to slow down and I want to use it, and film is still magic. It's light and silver.
When you take a scanner, when you take ancient negatives, and then things that you haven't seen in years and put away, you stick them in a scanner, and suddenly you see them again.
Yeah.
And it has a similar experience.
Yeah, I have 3 scanners. Yeah, I have 3 scanners.
So I'm just going to translate. Je vais juste essayer de... Okay.
This is the last question, alas.
Je vais juste essayer de capter sa Camille Miguel et je crois que c'est une bonne manière de terminer cette séance. Miguel préfère la pellicule traditionnelle parce qu'il se qualifie comme un célébrant, comme quelqu'un qui voit la vie en rose, peut-être, d'accord? Mais il s'agit d'une certaine magie. Il s'agit d'une magie créée c'est une magie argentée, c'est une lumière argentée, c'est la magie de la chambre claire et c'est quelque chose qu'on ne trouve pas avec un appareil numérique et que finalement il s'agit de trouver cette magie avec le négatif et qu'il s'agit d'une certaine discipline avec la pellicule traditionnelle. Et c'est une manière de se ralentir pour lui. C'est pour cela qu'il cherche en fait un appareil démodé qui pèse peut-être 2000 livres, juste pour capter la manière dont on filmait, dont on faisait des photographies au 19e siècle. C'est une manière de se ralentir pour cet art.
Well, thank you both.